You touched on earlier some of the big decisions that you need to make in the early days when it comes to strategy. And one of them is budget allocation. And so I wanted to ask how you think about the intersection of strategy and budget allocation and what the key considerations are for founders who are deciding how much to spend on product versus sales versus marketing.
In the early days, it's probably going to be 100% product focused or close to 100% product focused, and it should be. You're determining product market fit, you have to iterate, you don't really have very much to sell, or you may be doing customer interviews and so on, but really you're not really selling and marketing. So when the time comes when you've said, okay, now I do have a minimum viable product, I think some of the effort needs to shift to selling, but it should not be a huge amount of investment because your product still isn't quite there. And it depends upon your market, your industry as to when you would realize that, okay, now I need to invest more. So I advocate is you shift from 100% product focused budget or product budget to maybe getting more junior sales associates in under the leadership of the founder or someone senior, under the leadership ideally of the founder, and you figure out what that sales process is. How best is it to give demos? Who best should give demos? What is the value proposition? How do you craft the story? How do you tell the story? That is the founder's story. It is what the passion they have. You can't translate it into it, you can't transmit it to someone else early on because you got to repeat it enough. When you have that, then invest more and maybe get someone senior in. Then maybe it's 70% product, 30% sales. And of course, you have G&A and so on as well. And when that flywheel, when you can see the flywheel being built and you say, okay, it's time to scale, you can expand rapidly. And maybe that's a time to do another fundraise. Maybe you have sufficient funding to move from being very product heavy to being sales and marketing heavy. And the question on sales or marketing, it depends a lot on if you're B2C, like clearly it's going to be very marketing focused. If it's B2B, it's probably going to be very sales focused initially, less marketing. B2B2C is different as well. But I would ask $1 here and $1 here, what's going to give me more? And we experimented a lot with marketing as an example. We did Facebook lookalike campaigns. We got someone who had B2C experience thinking we could reach our instructors that way. And we realized, no, it really wasn't. We spent about 6 months. We allocated a budget for doing Google AdWords and so on, and experimented within that budget and said, okay, $1 here is not the same as $1 within sales. So we're just going to invest in getting more sales reps. Right? Much later, after we were in Wiley, I think we started to do marketing much more effectively. Then I would say when you're more mature, there are probably metrics in your industry. So cost of sales is about 30%. When you reach that level of maturity, then you say, okay, I'm going to allocate about 30% of my total budget to sales and marketing and kind of sticking within that.
Every dollar you invest has an opportunity cost, and not just money, but also your time, the resources. If we zoom out and think more broadly about this topic from the lens of the explore-exploit trade-off, at what point should founders shift their focus from this broad experimentation, whether it's product experimentation, sales strategy experimentation, maybe even marketing strategies, to moving to doubling down on something that works? There are a few different frameworks for how to think about this. One approach that I've seen founders use is this McKinsey's 3 Horizons framework. With this framework, you manage your business and growth using 3 horizons that represent, firstly, in the short term, building and maintaining your current core business. And then in the medium term, expansion and exploration into new opportunities. And then finally, in the long term, research and ideas for growth and new business opportunities. And McKinsey's view is that you spend 70% of your innovation efforts in that first short term, so that should be aimed at the core, 20% at adjacent step outs, and then 10% in this breakthrough innovation category, but all of this at the same time. So I wanted to ask, what do you think about this approach, and what kind of approach did you take on balancing this need to maintain your current core product while still exploring different avenues for future growth?
Yeah, I was not familiar with the framework, but we use something probably almost identical at zyBooks. So your first question was, how much do you experiment and when do you double down? You have to experiment till you're confident of that product market fit and you can see, I can build that flywheel. In our case, we called it the land and expand strategy, which is you get into one university with one course, and then that instructor tells another instructor, so now you have 3 courses the next semester, then 5, and so on. And we would keep track of that. Every semester we called it the sales engine, and we just provided the metrics, and they were all moving in the right direction. At that point, what was the value of, and I'm just going to mention one more point about customer feedback, is early on you're experimenting and you're getting a lot of customer feedback. And then you get to a point where you're, again, confident that you have the right product, but it's not for everyone. And so then you have to figure out how to incorporate customer feedback, when to listen and when not to listen. At that point, necessarily pivoting because a large customer wants to go in a certain direction may not be the right strategy. It's important then to say, okay, this is my point of view. This is our collective point of view. In our case, for instance, we would get asked for adaptivity. zyBooks is interactive, but it's not adaptive because it's locally adaptive. It's not globally adaptive. We don't give students different pathways to do based on their base of understanding of computer science. It's pretty much the same pathway. But we would get asked a lot for it. And we would say, no, that's not our point of view. And not everyone liked that. I'm deviating a little bit from your question, but in terms of customer feedback, the customer feedback is super important at all stages. But as you get further along, you develop a point of view, and then it's important to stick to that point of view, to that strategy, because it's working. If it's not working, then you need to get back to the drawing board and experiment and so on. So that was the first thing. Then you ask the question of how do you allocate amongst those 3 buckets. On the product side, we had both technology or platform and content. Content roadmap, we made sure we funded a 3 to 5 year roadmap, because the new products, they take 6 months to a year, sometimes 18 months to build. When we first did our first IT product, we had to build a new lab system that required considerable investment. So the investment in some sense was dictated by making sure that we knew what we were doing most immediately, and that consisted of maintaining and updating existing books in the catalog, existing features on the platform. Secondly, that medium term where we have releases scheduled for later this year or for next year, and those had to be funded. And then lastly, those that were coming out year 3 years from now, and those had to be funded. And I don't know exactly the budget allocation we used, but it was probably in the ratio that you were mentioning. So what we were doing on the content dictated quite a bit of what we did on the platform on the engineering side. But within engineering too, we had an allocation for what we referred to as tech debt, which is just technology debt, maintaining feature, and then doing innovation and just broad open exploration. So right now, for instance, AI falls in that bucket. I'm no longer at the company, but when I left, that was the last kind of category. That was the foremost category that we were experimenting with, both user-facing features that used AI as well as internal productivity features that we were working on that helped us be more productive, but using Gen AI. And again, we decided a ratio ahead of time. So we're going to spend 20 or 30% on tech debt and maintenance. We're going to spend 15% on looking at new feature development and sort of everything in between for more of the near-term features and so on.